Imagine a high school sophomore just, standing on a baseball field. It's a completely normal late spring afternoon.
Right, just a regular day.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The air is warm, grass smells fresh, and your mind is entirely focused on just the mundane details of teenage life. You aren't thinking about survival.
No, of course not.
You definitely aren't thinking about, the fragility of the human skull.
God, no.
But suddenly, a bat slips from a classmate's sweaty hands during a practice swing. It flies through the air like a helicopter blade.
Oh my God.
And before the sophomore's visual cortex can even process the incoming threat, it strikes him directly between the eyes.
That is terrifying.
It really is. He has absolutely no memory of the moment of impact. The force of the wood just crushes his nose perfectly flat against his face.
Wow, just instantly.
Instantly. In a fraction of a second, the soft tissue is destroyed. Multiple skull fractures just spiderweb across his forehead, and both eye sockets shatter completely. He falls to the dirt, essentially beginning this descent into a medically induced coma.
I mean, it is the kind of devastating, visceral, physical trauma that doesn't just, put your life on pause. It completely disintegrates the trajectory of who you thought you were going to be.
Yeah, absolutely.
The swelling in his brain was so severe that he was experiencing post-traumatic seizures. He actually had to be flown by helicopter to a larger hospital, put on a ventilator, and essentially kept on the absolute brink of death just to let the inflammation subside.
That's just so heavy.
Right. So you have to ask yourself a deeply uncomfortable question here. How do you rebuild a human being after something like that?
Yeah.
When your massive dreams of playing professional sports or, even just walking across a graduation stage looking normal are instantly destroyed.
Right, because the reality of recovery isn't some miraculous overnight cinematic transformation.
Exactly. There's no soaring soundtrack playing in the background. The answer is microscopic. It's almost invisible to the naked eye.
It's the daily choices.
Yes. It is the agonizing sheer weight of tiny daily choices.
Well, hi, I'm Alex.
And I'm Bailey, your narrators from Summary Sanctum.
Today, we are embarking on a deep dive into the revolutionary behavioral science mapped out in the book Atomic Habits by James Clear.
Which is such an incredible book.
It really is. And this isn't just about trying to wake up a little earlier or, remembering to drink more water. This is about decoding the invisible psychological forces, the tiny 1% changes that literally dictate the physical structure of our brains. They shape our identities, and they chart the ultimate destination of our lives.
Right. Our mission today is to provide you with the ultimate operating manual for human behavior. We are going to look under the hood at the underlying psychology.
The evolutionary biology, too.
Exactly. The biology and the incredibly practical steps you can take to fundamentally rewire your own machinery. Because the story of that high school sophomore isn't just a medical tragedy.
Right.
It's a testament to compounding effort. That sophomore was actually James Clear himself.
Which is just wild to think about.
It really is. And the way he rebuilt his shattered body and mind to eventually become a world-renowned author is the exact system we are going to unpack today.
So let's start with the foundational mathematics of how change actually works.
Yeah.
Because honestly, humans are notoriously terrible at grasping exponential growth.
Oh, we are awful at it. We are strictly linear thinkers.
Right. So the premise here is that habits are the compound interest of self-improvement. Getting 1% better at something doesn't sound like a strategy.
No, it sounds like a rounding error.
Exactly. It feels completely insignificant.
It feels insignificant because our brains are naturally wired to notice immediate contrast, not gradual accumulation. But the math is staggeringly unforgiving.
Yeah, break down the math for us.
Sure. So if you manage to get just 1% better every single day for 1 year, the compounding effect means you end up roughly 37 times better by the end of that year.
37 times.
Not 37% better. You are literally 37 times the person you were 12 months prior.
That is massive.
It is. But the sword swings with equal brutality in the other direction. If you get 1% worse every day, like if you slip just a tiny fraction in your diet or your temper, you decline almost all the way down to a baseline of 0.
To put a physical dimension on that mathematical concept, think about the aeronautics of a commercial airplane taking off from Los Angeles, programmed to land in New York City.
Okay, I like this analogy.
Right, so the pilot sets the heading. But imagine the nose of the plane is shifted just 3.5 degrees to the south.
which is tiny.
Right. At the point of departure, a 3.5-degree shift means the nose of the plane moves maybe 80 inches. If you are sitting in the cabin, you feel absolutely nothing.
Yeah, the stewards are still pouring coffee. The movie is playing on the seatback screen.
Exactly. The air is completely invisible. But as that plane travels across the curvature of the Earth, compounding that tiny directional error over thousands of miles, you don't end up looking at the Statue of Liberty. You land in Washington, D.C. instead.
Wow. Hundreds of miles away from your target.
Yep. That is the terror and the beauty of daily habits. Making a choice that is 1% better or 1% worse seems completely harmless in the present moment.
It really does. It's incredibly easy to justify skipping a workout or eating a plate of French fries because your brain looks at the immediate result and says, well, I didn't gain 10 pounds today, so it doesn't matter.
Right, the feedback loop is broken.
Exactly. But over the span of the thousands of microscopic moments that make up a lifetime, those 80-inch shifts at the nose of the plane determine the absolute difference between who you are and who you could have been.
But wait, I have to challenge this narrative of slow, steady compounding.
Oh, go for it.
Because it kind of ignores the lived reality of anyone who has ever tried to get in shape or learn a language. Like, it is incredibly common to go to the gym for a solid month, eat nothing but grilled chicken and kale, track every single macro, and then step on the scale and see absolutely zero movement.
Yep, we've all been there.
Right. If the 1% rule is real, where is the 30% improvement after a month? Because in reality, you just hit a wall of exhaustion, look in the mirror, see the exact same body, and quit.
That is a completely fair point. You are describing what behavioral scientists call the plateau of latent potential. And it is the exact graveyard where most good intentions go to die.
The graveyard of good intentions. I like that.
Yeah. The problem isn't that the math is wrong, though. The problem is our expectation of how progress actually reveals itself. We expect progress to be a straight, diagonal line upward.
Right. We want it to be predictable.
But biological and psychological systems don't work like that at all. They work through stored energy. Think about the thermodynamics of a freezing room. You are sitting there, you can see your breath in the air. It's 25 degrees Fahrenheit.
Okay, cool.
And there is a solid ice cube sitting on the table in front of you. Now, the room starts to heat up. 26 degrees.
27.
Right. And you are just staring at the ice cube. 28, 29, 30.
And nothing is happening.
Exactly. You have increased the temperature by 5 degrees, which takes a massive amount of energy, by the way. And the ice cube is still sitting there, completely solid. From the outside, it looks like all that thermal energy was completely wasted.
31 degrees. Still nothing.
Then the room hits 32 degrees. Suddenly, the ice begins to melt into a puddle. That 1 degree shift was seemingly no different from the temperature increases before it.
Right.
But it was the specific threshold required to trigger a phase transition.
So the energy expended during the 26 to 31 degree phase wasn't wasted at all. It was actually being stored in the molecular bonds of the ice, building the kinetic tension required for the visible change to finally happen.
Exactly. Breakthrough moments are almost always the delayed result of countless previous actions that built up the potential required to unleash a major change.
That makes so much sense.
If you look at the botanical growth of certain bamboo species, you can plant a seed, water it, fertilize it, and clear the soil around it for 5 entire years, and you will barely see a single green shoot break the surface of the dirt.
5 years of just looking at dirt.
Yes. For half a decade, it looks like you are watering a patch of dead dirt. But beneath the surface, the bamboo is building an incredibly complex, extensive root system. And then, in its 5th year, it suddenly explodes out of the ground, growing 90 feet into the air in the span of just 6 weeks.
90 feet in 6 weeks. Financed by 5 years of completely invisible labor.
Exactly.
So, if you are listening to this and you feel like you are doing all the right things but seeing zero traction, you have to understand that you are not failing. You are just in the 29 degree phase.
Yes, your delayed results are a biological necessity. You are building the root system, and you simply haven't crossed that critical phase transition threshold yet.
That completely upends how our culture traditionally approaches success.
Yeah.
Because our culture is obsessively fixated on the visible result, the melting of the ice.
Oh, absolutely. We are deeply pathologically goal-oriented. Corporate culture demands quarterly goals. New Year's resolutions are entirely goal-centric. Lose 20 pounds, run a marathon, write a novel. But if you want to actually cross the plateau of latent potential, you have to internalize a profound paradigm shift. You do not rise to the level of your goals. You fall to the level of your systems.
But hold on, if goals don't matter, don't we just become incredibly efficient at running in circles? Like, a system without a goal is just a hamster wheel. If you don't know you want to win a gold medal, why are you waking up at 4 a.m. to swim laps?
Well, the argument isn't that goals are completely useless. Goals are vital for setting a compass heading. They determine the direction.
Okay, that makes sense.
But the fatal flaw is believing the goal is the engine of progress. Think about the sheer survivorship bias we suffer from when we watch the Olympics. We see the athlete standing on the podium with the gold medal, and we hear them say, "I set a goal to win gold, and I never lost sight of it."
Right, and we falsely conclude the goal caused the victory.
Exactly. But we are ignoring the other 7 athletes in that exact same race who also had the exact same goal of winning gold but ended up losing.
Wow. If successful and unsuccessful people share the exact same goal, then the goal itself cannot be the variable that differentiates them. The goal is a constant.
The system is the variable, precisely. The winner and the loser both wanted it just as badly. The difference is that one of them implemented a daily system of continuous, microscopic improvements.
Like a specific diet or a specific biomechanical tweak to their stride.
Right, or a specific recovery protocol. If a basketball coach completely ignored the abstract goal of winning a championship and instead focused entirely on the relentless system of practicing defensive rotations perfectly every single day, the score would take care of itself.
Because goals are about winning the game for one moment, but systems are about continuing to play the game indefinitely.
Exactly.
So if setting a bold, audacious goal isn't the key to transforming our lives, what is the actual mechanism of change? Where do we point our effort?
We have to look at the architecture of human behavior, which operates in 3 concentric layers, much like an onion.
An onion.
Yeah, so the outermost layer is your outcomes. This is the realm of results: losing the weight, publishing the book, increasing your bank account. This is where most people spend all their mental energy.
Right.
The middle layer is your processes. This is the realm of habits and systems, the physical act of going to the gym, the routine of sitting at your desk to type for an hour, the implementation of a new budget.
In the innermost core.
The absolute center of the onion is your identity. This is the realm of your deeply held beliefs, your worldview, your self-image, and the unconscious judgments you make about yourself.
And this is exactly where almost every human being gets it completely backward. We work outside in, we start at the surface.
Yep. We decide we want the outcome of being thin. So we move one layer deep and change the process by starving ourselves on a miserable fad diet.
And then we just grit our teeth and hope that by forcing this alien process on ourselves, our identity will eventually catch up and we will miraculously become a fit person.
And that causes massive cognitive dissonance because your behavior is in direct conflict with your underlying belief system. True, sustainable behavior change requires you to work inside out.
Inside out.
Yes.
Yeah.
True behavior change is actually identity change. Consider the psychology of 2 different people who are trying to quit smoking. When they are at a party and someone offers them a cigarette, the first person holds up their hand and says, "No thanks, I'm trying to quit."
I mean, that sounds like a perfectly reasonable, polite decline.
It does,
Wrong.
but linguistically and psychologically, it reveals a massive vulnerability. That person still fundamentally identifies as a smoker.
Oh, I see.
Their core identity hasn't changed. They're just a smoker who is currently trying to abstain from their natural state. They are using willpower to fight their own self-image.
That sounds exhausting.
It is. Now, the second person is offered the exact same cigarette and simply says, "No thanks, I'm not a smoker."
It's a tiny semantic shift, but it is an earthquake in terms of identity.
Exactly. The first person is resisting a temptation. The second person is simply stating a fact about their reality.
Because smoking is no longer a part of their self-concept, so refusing the cigarette doesn't require any willpower at all. It's just who they are.
Yes. The ultimate goal isn't to read a book. The goal is to become a reader. The goal isn't to run a marathon. The goal is to become a runner. Once your pride gets involved in your identity, you will fight tooth and nail to maintain your habits.
But this feels like a chicken and egg problem.
How so?
Well, you can't just forcefully hallucinate a new identity. Like, you can't stand in front of your bathroom mirror, staring at a body you haven't exercised in a decade, and aggressively whisper, "I am an elite runner."
No, you definitely can't do that.
Your brain is highly evolved to detect deception. It knows you are lying. You will just feel like a fraud.
Which is why you cannot fake it through positive affirmations alone. Identity is not spoken into existence. It is earned through tangible action. Neuroplasticity. The brain's ability to physically rewire itself requires evidence.
Okay, evidence?
Yes. Every single action you take is a literal vote for the type of person you wish to become. If you think of your mind like a democracy, you don't need a unanimous vote to win an election. You just need a majority.
So if I sit down and write one single terrible sentence, my brain logs that as one vote for the identity of a writer.
Exactly.
And if I put away one single piece of folded laundry, my brain logs a vote for the identity of an organized person. I don't have to write a masterpiece to prove I'm a writer. I just have to show up to the polls and cast the microscopic vote.
Over time, as those votes accumulate, the evidence becomes undeniable. Your habits shape your identity, and then your new identity reinforces your habits. It's a continuous, self-sustaining feedback loop. But the engine that starts the loop is always the tiny, undeniable action.
But how do we actually get ourselves to take that action? Because knowing we should cast a vote and actually getting off the couch to do it are two vastly different things.
Very true. We need to look at the actual neurological machinery of how a habit is forged in real time.
Let's do it.
To understand the modern neuroscience of habits, we actually have to travel back to a dimly lit laboratory in 1898. A psychologist named Edward Thorndike was conducting experiments on animal intelligence.
Sounds vaguely ominous.
Well, he built what he called a puzzle box. It was a wooden crate with a door that was rigged to open only if a specific mechanical action was performed inside, like pressing a wooden lever or pulling a wire loop.
And he took a series of hungry cats and locked them inside these puzzle boxes while placing a bowl of highly fragrant fish just outside the bars.
Right. So the cat can smell the food, it can see the food, but it is physically trapped.
I mean, that sounds cruel by modern standards.
It does, but it revealed the exact mechanism of learning. When first placed in the box, the cat's behavior was completely chaotic. It would bite the wooden slats, frantically scratch at the corners, and thrust its paws through the gaps.
Just panic.
Basically. But eventually, amidst this random thrashing, the cat would accidentally step on the lever, the heavy door would pop open, and the cat would sprint out and eat the fish.
Pure trial and error.
Yes, but Thorndike didn't stop there. He took the exact same cat and put it right back in the box. And he did it again and again, tracking the time it took for the cat to escape.
Oh, I see where this is going.
Over subsequent trials, the frantic, useless scratching slowly faded away. The cat's brain was aggressively mapping the environment, pruning away the actions that yielded no result, and hardwiring the exact action that led to the food.
Wow.
By trial 20 or 30, the cat would be dropped in the box, immediately walk over, press the lever, and walk out.
The brain learned to automate the solution to a recurring problem.
Exactly. And that exact same biological process, pruning the useless thrashing and automating the lever press, is happening in our brains thousands of times a day. It operates in a 4-step neurological cascade.
Walk us through the 4 steps.
Those 4 steps govern every single habit you possess. First, you have the cue. This is a piece of information that predicts a reward. It is a trigger in your environment. For example, your phone screen lights up on your desk.
Second is the craving. And this is crucial to misunderstand. You do not crave the physical plastic and glass of the phone.
Right.
The craving is the motivational force, the desire to change your internal state. You want to relieve your underlying anxiety, or cure your boredom, or satisfy your social curiosity about who is reaching out to you.
Third is the response. This is the physical or mental action you actually take. You reach your hand out, pick up the phone, unlock it, and read the notification.
And fourth is the reward. You read the text message, your curiosity is satisfied, you get a microdose of relief from your boredom, and your brain logs that entire sequence as a successful survival strategy.
Yes, it explicitly connects the visual cue of the lit screen with the emotional reward of connection.
Cue, craving, response, reward.
If a behavior falls short in any of these 4 stages, it will never become a habit. Eliminate the cue, and your habit never starts.
Reduce the craving, and you won't experience enough motivation to act.
Make the response too difficult, and you won't be able to do it. And if the reward fails to satisfy your desire, your brain has no reason to remember the sequence for the future.
Which brings us to the master blueprint for hacking this neurological loop. If we want to build a good habit, we have to manipulate those 4 steps in our favor.
Exactly. We have to make the cue obvious, make the craving attractive, make the response easy, and make the reward satisfying.
And conversely, if you're trying to dismantle a destructive habit, you simply invert the framework.
Make the cue invisible, make the craving unattractive, make the response difficult, and make the reward unsatisfying.
Okay, let's break down that first law and make it obvious. This is all about gaining control over the cue. Our brains are incredibly adept at picking up cues completely below our conscious awareness.
They really are.
There was a terrifying and amazing story about a paramedic who was attending a casual family gathering. She had spent decades in the field, responding to thousands of cardiac emergencies. She is chatting with relatives, and she happens to look across the living room at her father-in-law.
And instantly, a massive alarm bell goes off in her head. She walks over to him and says, "I don't like the way you look. You need to go to the emergency room immediately."
Which is wild because her father-in-law feels perfectly fine. He has no chest pain, no shortness of breath. He thinks she is overreacting.
But she insists. They rush him to the hospital, and testing reveals he has a major blocked artery and is mere moments away from a massive, potentially fatal heart attack. She saved his life.
But when asked how she knew, she couldn't point to a single specific symptom. She just said, "His face looks wrong."
Right.
How is that neurologically possible? It sounds like psychic intuition.
It isn't magic. It is high-level pattern recognition, heavily reliant on a part of the brain called the basal ganglia. Over years of seeing heart failure patients, her brain had unconsciously mapped the microscopic cues of poor blood perfusion.
Like what?
Subtle changes in skin tone, the specific pallor around the lips, a micro-shift in breathing cadence. The brain is a prediction machine. It continuously absorbs sensory data, compares it to historical catalogs, and triggers a physical feeling like dread or certainty.
Long before the executive functioning of the prefrontal cortex can articulate why it feels that way.
Exactly. Military analysts can look at a radar screen and instantly identify an enemy missile versus a friendly aircraft, even when the blips look identical to a novice.
But this incredible superpower of unconscious automation becomes our absolute worst enemy when it comes to our daily habits.
Oh, absolutely.
Because our brains are so good at automating responses to cues, we stop noticing what we are doing entirely. We mindlessly grab a handful of potato chips simply because we walked past the open pantry door.
Or we mindlessly pull out our phones the second we step into an elevator because the cue of awkward silence in a metal box triggers the response of seek digital distraction.
Exactly.
The psychologist Carl Jung famously noted, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate."
That is a brilliant quote.
It is. If you want to change a deeply ingrained habit, the very first step is not to force yourself to stop. The first step is to simply wake up. You have to make the invisible cues obvious again.
And a highly practical tool for doing this is creating a habit scorecard.
Yes.
You become an impartial auditor of your own life. You take a piece of paper and write down every single thing you do in the morning. I wake up, I turn off the alarm, I look at Instagram for 10 minutes, I go to the bathroom, I step on the scale, I brush my teeth.
And once the list is compiled, you categorize them. You put a plus sign next to habits that move you toward your desired identity, a minus sign next to those that pull you away from it, and an equal sign next to neutral necessities.
Crucially, you do not judge yourself.
No judgment. You don't berate yourself for the minus signs. You are acting like a scientist observing a specimen. You are just identifying the cues.
Right. And if a scorecard isn't enough to break your trance, you can borrow a brilliant physical tactic from the Japanese railway system.
Oh, I love this one.
It's a safety protocol called shisakanko, which translates to pointing and calling. If you watch a Japanese train conductor, they look like they are performing an elaborate synchronized dance. They literally point at physical objects and vocalize their status out loud.
They point at the green signal light and yell, "Signal is green." As the train approaches a station, they point at the speedometer and yell out the exact speed.
They point at the timetable. It looks slightly ridiculous to Western eyes, but the data is staggering. This system of pointing and calling reduces workplace errors by up to 85% and slashes accidents by 30%.
Because it is neurologically impossible to remain on autopilot when you are actively engaging your motor cortex to point, your vocal cords to speak, and your auditory loop to hear your own voice.
It yanks the brain out of the default mode network and forces conscious presence.
You can actually weaponize this in your own kitchen. If you catch your hand reaching for a donut that you know you shouldn't eat, literally point your finger at the pastry and say out loud, "I am about to eat this donut. It is packed with sugar. I do not need it to survive, and it is going to make me feel lethargic in an hour."
Just hearing your own voice state the reality of the action evaporates the mindless trance.
Once you have achieved awareness of your existing cues, you have to design specific, obvious cues for the new habits you want to build. The biggest reason people fail at new habits is that their cues are hopelessly vague.
Like saying, I'm going to read more this year, or I'm going to eat healthier.
Right, which is practically useless because there is no specific trigger attached to the intention. You need what researchers call an implementation intention.
You have to lock the behavior into physical space and time.
Exactly. The formula is rigid. I will perform this specific behavior at this exact time in this exact location. So I will read one chapter of a book at 7 p.m. sitting in the green armchair.
You are removing the psychological burden of having to make a decision in the moment. When 7 p.m. rolls around, the environment makes the decision for you.
You can compound this effect with habit stacking, where you use an already deeply ingrained habit as the cue for a new one. The formula shifts to, after current habit, I will new habit.
Give us an example.
Sure. After I pour my morning cup of coffee, I will immediately meditate for 60 seconds. You are piggybacking on neural pathways that are already carved deep into your brain.
And this taps into a profound psychological phenomenon called the Diderot effect. Denis Diderot was a brilliant French philosopher who lived his entire life in abject poverty. But in 1765, Catherine the Great of Russia heard of his financial struggles and bought his entire library, paying him a massive sum.
And suddenly, flush with cash, Diderot went out and bought himself a breathtaking, luxurious scarlet robe.
But that beautiful robe proved to be a psychological virus. When Diderot brought it home, he noticed that his glorious new garment made all of his other possessions look incredibly shabby and cheap by comparison. His old desk didn't match the grandeur of the robe, so he bought a new, expensive desk.
Oh, wow.
Then the rug looked pathetic, so he bought a new rug from Damascus. Then he needed new artwork, new sculptures. It initiated a relentless spiral of consumption. One purchase psychologically demanded the next.
We experience the Diderot effect all the time. You buy a new couch, and suddenly the coffee table looks wrong. You buy the coffee table, and now the paint color on the wall needs to change.
Human behavior is a chain reaction.
But instead of letting it drain our bank accounts, we can harness the Diderot effect to cascade positive behaviors. After I put my dinner plate in the dishwasher, I will wipe down the counter. After I wipe down the counter, I will set out my gym clothes for tomorrow morning.
But the absolute bedrock of making cues obvious is environment design.
Yes, environment design is massive. We desperately want to believe that we are in total conscious control of our choices. But the truth is, our environment often dictates our behavior far more than our willpower.
Right. During the 1970s energy crisis, researchers conducted a fascinating study in a suburb of Amsterdam. They analyzed the energy consumption of identical houses in the same neighborhood. But they found that some families used a massive 30% less energy than their neighbors.
The houses are exactly the same size, the weather is the same, the demographics are the same.
So why such a massive discrepancy?
It came down to a single, tiny architectural decision made by the builders. In the houses that consumed less energy, the electrical meter had been installed upstairs in the main hallway, highly visible to anyone walking by.
And in the houses that consumed more energy,
the meter was installed down in the dark basement, completely out of sight.
The brain is an aggressive energy saver. It will not expend cognitive glucose to think about a hidden meter in a basement.
But when the meter is in the hallway, the visual cue bypasses executive functioning. Every time they walk past it, the visual salience of the spinning dials triggers an immediate, unconscious reminder to turn off the lights. Visibility literally drives behavior.
Which means relying on willpower is a fool's errand. Willpower is a finite resource that depletes throughout the day.
If you want to play the guitar more often, do not keep it locked in its case, shoved in the back of your closet. Put it on a bright stand in the absolute center of your living room.
If you want to drink more water, do not rely on remembering to walk to the kitchen. Fill up 5 water bottles in the morning and place them visibly on your desk, your nightstand, your coffee table. Make the right choice the most obvious, unavoidable thing in the room.
I can hear the pushback from people living in cramped spaces, though.
Yeah, I was just thinking that. Like, I live in a tiny studio apartment in a crowded city. My desk is 3 feet from my bed, which is 2 feet from my kitchen counter.
Yeah.
How on earth do I separate my environmental cues when my entire life happens in a single 300 square foot box?
It is a significant challenge, but the solution relies on strict contextual boundaries. The mantra must be one space, one use. You cannot mix contexts.
Right.
If you sit on your bed to read, and then sit on your bed to watch stressful news on your laptop, and then sit on your bed to eat takeout, and then try to sleep in that exact same spot, your brain is in chaos.
When you lie down, it has no idea which neurological script it is supposed to execute. Is it time to release melatonin for sleep or cortisol for stress?
Exactly. So even in a studio apartment, you have to digitally and physically partition the space. The chair by the window is exclusively for reading. You never bring your phone there. The tiny desk is exclusively for work. The bed is exclusively for sleep.
When you ruthlessly protect the context of an environment, the habits associated with it become stable and deeply predictable.
And this reveals the inversion of the first law. Make it invisible. If you want to eradicate a bad habit, you have to ruthlessly amputate the cue from your environment.
If you spend too much time watching television, you don't just promise to watch less. You unplug the TV, take the batteries out of the remote, and put the remote in a drawer in another room.
Out of sight, out of mind is not just a cultural idiom, it is a neurological fact. The people who appear to have the most heroic self-control are actually just people who have engineered their lives so they rarely have to use self-control.
They simply spend less time in tempting situations.
Okay, so we've established that making a cue obvious is how you spark a habit. But a spark doesn't guarantee a fire. If you see the cue, but it doesn't trigger a biological craving, a literal chemical spike in your brain, you will just look at the cue and walk away.
Which brings us to the dopamine engine of craving and the second law. Make it attractive.
To understand the violent power of craving, we need to look at the work of Nico Tinbergen, an evolutionary biologist who won a Nobel Prize for his research on animal instincts.
Okay, let's hear it.
He spent years studying herring gulls. When a herring gull chick is hungry, it instinctively pecks at a specific red dot located on the lower beak of its adult mother. The mother feels the peck and regurgitates food for the chicks.
That's lovely.
Tinbergen wanted to know just how hardwired this visual trigger was, so he constructed fake, disembodied beaks out of cardboard and painted a red dot on them.
And when he presented these crude, flat cardboard beaks to the chicks, they pecked at them just as enthusiastically as they did the real mothers.
They were genetically programmed to respond to the visual cue of the red dot, regardless of context.
So Tinbergen pushed the experiment to the absolute extreme. He painted a cardboard beak with 3 giant red dots.
And when he showed this to the chicks, they went absolutely berserk. They pecked at the 3 dots furiously, ignoring actual adult gulls nearby. Tinbergen had discovered the concept of the supernormal stimulus.
A supernormal stimulus?
Yes. It was a heightened, exaggerated version of reality that elicited a much stronger neurological response than anything found in nature.
And here is the terrifying reality of the 21st century modern society, is essentially a sprawling, inescapable landscape of supernormal stimuli engineered explicitly to hijack our biology.
Consider junk food. Our ancestors roaming the harsh environment of the African savanna rarely found dense sources of salt, sugar, or fat. These were rare, vital nutrients for survival.
So when a hunter-gatherer did stumble across a sweet patch of berries or fatty animal marrow, their brain's reward center screamed, "Consume as much of this as physically possible immediately, because you might starve tomorrow."
But we no longer live in a scarcity environment. We live in a calorie-dense utopia. But our brains are still running that exact same ancient survival software.
Modern food scientists utilize complex chemistry to engineer highly processed foods that hit the exact bliss point.
The perfect, unnatural combination of salt, sugar, crunch, and fat that overwhelms the brain's reward circuitry.
And social media platforms are supernormal stimuli for our ancient evolutionary need for tribal connection and gossip. Video games are supernormal stimuli for our primal desire for achievement, status, and hunting.
These modern supernormal stimuli completely short-circuit our dopamine system. And we need to clarify what dopamine actually does, because it is universally misunderstood.
Pop culture talks about dopamine as the pleasure chemical, like that you get a hit of dopamine when you eat the chocolate cake or when you win the game.
But the neurological reality is far more manipulative. Dopamine is not primarily about experiencing pleasure, it is about anticipating it.
Right.
In the 1950s, scientists conducted a brutal but illuminating experiment where they implanted microscopic electrodes into the brains of rats. These electrodes completely blocked the release of dopamine.
And what happened?
The results were immediate and devastating. The rats lost the will to live. They wouldn't eat, they wouldn't mate, they wouldn't explore. They simply curled up and eventually died of thirst, even though a bowl of water was sitting mere inches away from their faces.
Wow. Without dopamine, desire ceases to exist. And without desire, all action stops.
Exactly. But when scientists later measured dopamine levels in healthy animals, they found that dopamine spikes the highest before the reward is delivered.
When you hear your phone buzz in your pocket, your dopamine levels shoot up immediately. It is the craving, the tense anticipation of what that message might contain, that physically compels your arm to reach into your pocket.
By the time you actually read the message, the dopamine is already dropping.
Therefore, if we want to build a difficult good habit, we have to artificially attach a dopamine spike to it. We have to make it attractive.
One of the most effective psychological hacks for this is called temptation bundling. You take an action you want to do, and you permanently bundle it with an action you need to do.
This leverages Premack's principle, which states that a more probable behavior will reinforce a less probable behavior.
My favorite example of this is Ronan Byrne, an electrical engineering student in Ireland.
Oh, this story's amazing.
He knew he needed to exercise, but like a normal college student, he just wanted to binge watch Netflix. So he took a stationary bike, cracked open the casing, and physically wired it to his laptop.
He literally wired it.
He literally wired it. He wrote a custom software program that dictated Netflix would only play if he was actively pedaling the bike above a certain RPM. The moment his pedaling slowed down, the screen would pause.
It is a brilliantly engineered commitment device.
Yeah.
He bundled the immediate dopamine anticipation of watching a movie with the physical friction of a cardiovascular workout.
You don't need to write code to do this. You simply establish rigid rules. I am only allowed to listen to my favorite true crime podcast while I am physically lifting weights at the gym.
Or I only get to get a pedicure while processing my backlog of work emails. You are using the powerful gravitational pull of the temptation to drag you through the friction of the difficult task.
But we also have to recognize that dopamine isn't just triggered by food or entertainment. It is heavily modulated by our deep evolutionary need for social belonging.
Humans are herd animals. We are biologically terrified of being ostracized because in the ancestral environment, being exiled from the tribe meant certain death by starvation or predators.
Look at the famous Polgar sisters. They were raised in Hungary, in a house where their parents purposefully engineered an environment absolutely obsessed with the game of chess.
The house was packed with thousands of chess books. Portraits of famous grandmasters hung on the walls. The parents constantly praised and rewarded chess strategy.
And the result? All three sisters grew up to be absolute chess prodigies, with one becoming the youngest grandmaster in history.
Their environment made an obsessive, grueling dedication to chess seem completely normal and deeply attractive, because performing well at chess granted them immense status and love within their specific tribe.
Psychologically, we unconsciously imitate the habits of three specific groups of people to ensure our survival: the close, the many, and the powerful.
Break those down.
Sure. The close refers to our family and immediate friends. If you marry someone who cooks healthy meals every night, your diet will drastically improve through sheer proximity. The many refers to the broader crowd. We have an overwhelming psychological need to conform to the majority.
The sheer power of the many was proven by psychologist Solomon Asch in the 1950s. He brought a single subject into a room filled with other people who were secretly actors working for the experiment.
Ash held up a card with one line on it and another card with 3 lines of varying lengths. He asked everyone in the room to identify which of the 3 lines matched the single line. The answer was incredibly obvious.
But the actors were instructed to confidently give the wrong answer. One by one, they would point to a line that was clearly too short and say it was the match.
And when it was finally the actual subject's turn, they faced massive cognitive dissonance. Their own eyes told them the group was wrong. But the evolutionary pressure to conform was so agonizing that in a huge percentage of the trials, the subject would literally lie, deny their own visual perception, and agree with the incorrect group just to avoid standing out.
That is wild. We would fundamentally rather be wrong with the crowd than be right by ourselves.
And the third group we imitate is the powerful, those with status, prestige, and wealth. We buy the clothes that celebrities wear and copy the morning routines of billionaires because we subconsciously believe imitating their habits will grant us their status.
So the actionable advice here is profound. If you want to build a habit, you must intentionally join a culture where your desired behavior is the normal behavior.
Exactly. If you want to read more, don't just sit alone in your room fighting distraction. Join a dedicated book club. Your internal identity shifts from "I am struggling to read" to "I am a part of this tribe and we are readers." The social reinforcement provides the dopamine.
But what if a habit is just Fundamentally difficult, physically painful, and you can't join a club for it. How do you make running sprints in the freezing rain attractive?
You have to engage in cognitive reframing. You have to reprogram the software of your mind with a tiny shift in vocabulary. You must stop saying "I have to" and start saying "I get to."
When you say "I have to go run," your brain interprets the action as a burden, a punishment being inflicted upon you.
But when you say "I get to go run," you reframe it as an opportunity. I get to build my cardiovascular endurance. I get to experience the feeling of a healthy body. It sounds like cheap self-help, but it actually alters the neurochemical response in your brain, lowering cortisol and increasing motivation.
You can solidify this with a motivation ritual. Ed Lattimore, a professional boxer and writer, noticed that his brain would instantly lock into a state of deep focus the moment he put his headphones on, even if no music was playing.
Over years of training, he had classically conditioned his nervous system to associate the physical sensation of the headphones pressing over his ears with intense concentration.
You can create your own ritual. Take 3 specific deep breaths before you open your laptop to work. Over time, those 3 breaths become a biological trigger that makes the hard work feel accessible and attractive.
And to invert the second law, make it unattractive, you have to strip away the glossy veneer of your bad habits and expose the primal motives they are failing to satisfy.
When you endlessly scroll through a social media feed, you are not genuinely craving the act of looking at a glowing screen.
No, you are craving human connection, social validation, and the reduction of uncertainty.
When you realize that the bad habit is just a highly engineered, superficial pacifier that doesn't actually solve your deep evolutionary needs, the craving loses its power.
Which transitions us from the craving to the actual physical execution of the habit, the third law. Make it easy.
There's a deeply illuminating story about a photography professor at the University of Florida named Jerry Yulesman. On the very first day of the semester, he stood in front of his class and divided them straight down the middle.
The students on the left side of the room were designated the quantity group. Their grading rubric was simple. They would be graded solely on the sheer volume of photographs they produced. Submit 100 photos, get an A. 90 photos, get a B. Quality did not matter.
In the other half.
The students on the right side of the room were the quality group. They only had to produce 1 single photograph for the entire semester. But to get an A, that one photograph had to be a masterpiece of composition and lighting.
At the end of the term, the professor laid out all the photos, and the results shattered everyone's assumptions. Every single one of the best, most beautiful, most emotionally resonant photographs came from the quantity group.
Not a single masterpiece came from the quality group.
Because the quantity group spent the entire semester in the darkroom, getting their hands dirty. They were testing different exposures, playing with lighting, making hundreds of mistakes, and physically learning the mechanics of the camera.
They got the reps in.
Exactly. Meanwhile, the quality group spent months sitting around in circles, theorizing about the abstract nature of perfection. They debated composition, they read books, but they never actually took any pictures. By the end, they had nothing but unverified theories and one mediocre, highly stressed photograph.
This perfectly encapsulates the critical, often confusing difference between motion and action. Motion is researching the best diet plan, reading reviews for running shoes, or outlining the chapters of a book. Action is eating a salad, running a mile, or writing a paragraph.
Motion makes us feel like we are getting things done. It provides a dopamine hit of perceived productivity. But motion never produces a result. Action is the only thing that delivers an outcome.
So why do we spend so much time stuck in motion? Because motion is safe. Motion is the ultimate disguise for procrastination because it protects you from the emotional risk of failure.
If I'm outlining my book, I can't be judged on my terrible writing. I'm just preparing.
This ties directly into the most common question in behavioral psychology. How long does it take to form a new habit? Is it 21 days? 66 days?
The truth is, the passage of time is completely irrelevant.
Habit formation is a neurological process called automaticity. This is the transition where a behavior moves from the conscious, effortful prefrontal cortex into the automatic, unconscious basal ganglia. And automaticity is entirely dependent on frequency, not time.
It's Hebb's law in neuroscience. Neurons that fire together, wire together. If you do a behavior twice in 30 days, the neural pathway remains incredibly weak. If you do it 200 times in 30 days, the pathway becomes a superhighway.
It's the reps that matter. And to get those hundreds of repetitions in, you must bow down to the law of least effort.
Human beings are biologically wired to conserve energy. Given two options, we will naturally gravitate toward the one that requires the least amount of physical and cognitive friction.
Look at the global electronics market in the 1970s. American factories were struggling. Their televisions were heavy and prone to breaking. Then Japanese firms entered the market and completely decimated the competition.
How did they do it?
They utilized a philosophy of lean production, which was essentially addition by subtraction. Japanese managers ruthlessly redesigned their factory floors. They study the exact movements of their workers and redesign the layout to eliminate every single unnecessary twist of the torso, every excessive reach of the arm, every wasted step.
By subtracting the microscopic friction of physical effort, they added unprecedented speed and quality to their products.
You must apply this exact ergonomic ruthlessness to your daily life. You have to reduce the friction associated with your good habits by priming your environment.
If you want to exercise before work, do not rely on your groggy 6 a.m. brain to find your shorts in the dark. Lay out your clothes, your shoes, your keys, and a full water bottle the night before. You are removing the friction of decision-making.
If you want to eat a healthy dinner, spend an hour on Sunday chopping all your vegetables and putting them in clear containers. On Wednesday night, when you are exhausted and your willpower is at absolute zero, throwing a pre-chopped salad into a bowl requires less friction than navigating a delivery app.
Wait, I need to push back on this idea of making things easy, specifically when we get to the 2-minute rule. The book talks about Twyla Tharp, one of the greatest choreographers of the modern era. She has this punishing 2-hour daily workout routine.
Right.
But she claims her actual habit isn't the workout. Her habit is simply putting on her gym clothes and getting into a taxi cab. Once she's in the cab, the habit is complete.
That's the 2-minute rule.
Right. The 2-minute rule says you should scale any new habit down so it takes less than 2 minutes. Read a book becomes other. Read one page. But honestly, isn't this just elaborate self-delusion?
How do you mean?
I know I'm not trying to just read one page. I know I want to work out for an hour.
Yeah.
Why would I congratulate myself for just putting on my shoes?
It feels like self-delusion only if you misunderstand the goal of the exercise. The goal in the beginning is not physical transformation. The goal is neurological stabilization.
Neurological stabilization.
A habit must be firmly established before it can be improved. You cannot optimize a behavior that does not exist. When you force yourself to only read one page or only do one push-up, you are completely removing the cognitive dread associated with a massive task. You are mastering the art of showing up.
You are casting a tiny, undeniable vote for the identity of someone who simply does not miss a day.
Exactly. You are taking the decisive moment, that tiny fork in the road where you either choose the productive path or the lazy path, and making the productive choice so incredibly easy that it requires zero willpower.
Once you initiate the action, physics takes over. An object in motion stays in motion.
It is much easier to keep reading once the book is open than it is to open the book in the first place. Over time, you use habit shaping. You master the 2-minute phase until it is completely automatic. Then you advance to the 5-minute phase. You systematically build the habit's complexity without ever triggering the brain's alarm system that screams, "This is too much work."
And the inversion of the third law is equally powerful. Make bad habits painfully difficult. Add friction.
What's your favorite example of this?
Oh, my favorite historical example is Victor Hugo, the legendary author of The Hunchback of Notre Dame. He had signed a contract with his publisher, but he spent a year completely procrastinating, throwing lavish parties, and avoiding his desk.
Naturally.
Finally, his publisher gave him a strict 6-month deadline. Hugo knew his own lack of willpower. He knew if he had the option to go out, he would take it.
So what did he do?
He orchestrated a massive commitment device. He gathered up every single piece of clothing he owned, his coats, his trousers, his shoes, locked them inside a giant trunk, and instructed his assistant to take the trunk away and not return it until the book was finished.
He literally had no clothes.
Hugo was left with nothing but a large knitted shawl. He was effectively trapped in his own home. He couldn't leave the house without being arrested for public indecency.
That is hilarious.
He intentionally made the bad habit of partying completely impossible. With nothing else to do, he sat at his desk and wrote furiously, finishing the massive novel weeks ahead of the deadline.
It's an extreme, hilarious example, but it proves the concept. If you spend too much time on your phone in bed, don't try to rely on willpower. Buy a cheap alarm clock and leave your phone on a charger in the kitchen overnight.
Introduce a physical wall of friction between you and the bad habit.
Which brings us to the final piece of the neurological puzzle. You've made the cue obvious, the craving attractive, and the response easy. The action is complete. but will you ever do it again?
That depends entirely on the fourth law. Make it satisfying. This deals with the reward phase.
In the late 1990s, a public health worker named Stephen Luby traveled to Karachi, Pakistan. The city was facing a massive public health crisis. Disease, diarrhea, and respiratory infections were rampant.
Everyone knew that washing their hands with soap would drastically reduce the spread of bacteria. The government had run awareness campaigns.
The knowledge was there, but the habit just wasn't sticking. Luby realized that the local soap was cheap, industrial, and completely unpleasant to use. It felt like a chore.
So he didn't run another educational campaign. He partnered with Procter & Gamble and flooded the neighborhoods with premium soap. It smelled incredible. It lathered up instantly into a rich, satisfying foam. It washed off easily.
Suddenly, the act of washing your hands wasn't just a hygienic necessity. It was a deeply pleasurable sensory experience.
The results were staggering. Infant diarrhea fell by 52%. Pneumonia dropped by nearly 50%. Skin infections plummeted. The habit stuck permanently, not because people suddenly understood germ theory better, but because the immediate sensory reward felt satisfying.
This story exposes the fundamental evolutionary mismatch that makes modern life so incredibly difficult.
The mismatch. Let's dig into that.
The human brain evolved over hundreds of thousands of years in an immediate return environment. If you were walking on the savannah and saw a lion, you ran. The return was immediate. You survived. If you found a fruit tree, you ate the fruit. The return was immediate, caloric energy.
Our brains are hardwired to prioritize immediate, tangible payoffs.
But society has evolved much faster than our biology. We now live in a delayed return environment. You sit at a desk and type on a keyboard today, but you don't get a paycheck for 2 months. You put money into a 401k today, but you don't get the reward of retirement for 40 years.
You eat a salad today, but you don't get the reward of a healthy heart until a decade from now. This creates a brutal paradox.
The costs of your good habits are all in the present moment, but the rewards are delayed into the abstract future. Conversely, the rewards of your bad habits, the sugar rush of the donut, the nicotine hit of the cigarette, are immediate, but the costs, diabetes, lung cancer, are delayed.
This gives us the cardinal rule of behavior change. What is immediately rewarded is repeated. What is immediately punished is avoided.
So the million-dollar question is, how do we bridge that gap? How do we manufacture an immediate, satisfying reward for a habit that naturally has a delayed payoff?
If I skip buying my $5 morning coffee to save for a vacation, sitting in my car with no coffee feels like a punishment, not a reward.
You have to make the invisible act of avoidance visible. You need a visual tracker. If you skip the coffee, you immediately open your banking app and transfer $5 into a specific savings account, explicitly labeled trip to Paris.
You don't get the sensory reward of the coffee, but you manufacture an immediate dopamine hit by watching the numbers in the Paris account physically go up. You're making the abstract progress tangible.
A legendary example of visual tracking is the paperclip strategy. A young, rookie stockbroker named Trent Boosmid used this to dominate his firm. Every morning, he placed 2 glass jars on his desk. One jar contained exactly 120 paperclips. The other jar was completely empty.
He would pick up the phone, make a cold call, and immediately move 1 paperclip from the full jar to the empty jar.
He didn't focus on the delayed reward of the commission checks. He focused entirely on the immediate, satisfying tactile reward of hearing the paperclip clink into the glass. It provided instant, undeniable visual evidence of his effort.
Comedian Jerry Seinfeld used a similar system to force himself to write jokes. He hung a massive calendar on his wall, and for every day he wrote, he drew a giant red X over that date.
After a week, you have a chain. And the psychological satisfaction shifts from the act of writing itself to the deep desire to simply not break the chain.
But human beings are fallible. The chain will eventually break. You will get sick, your car will break down, a crisis will occur. James Clear offers a vital, rigid rule for when this happens. Never miss twice.
Missing one day is a statistical anomaly, it's an accident. But missing 2 days in a row is the neurological beginning of a new negative habit.
When you eat a pizza instead of a salad, the psychological danger isn't the calories. The danger is the downward spiral of shame that convinces you that since the streak is broken, you might as well eat poorly the rest of the week.
The defining characteristic of elite performers is not that they never fail. It is that their recovery time is lightning fast.
Let's look at the inversion of the 4th law. Make it unsatisfying. If you want to stop a bad behavior, you must attach an immediate visceral punishment to it. Roger Fisher, a brilliant conflict management expert at Harvard during the height of the Cold War, understood this deeply.
Oh, this is intense.
He looked at the mechanism for launching nuclear weapons and was horrified by how sterile and disconnected it was. The president carries the codes in a briefcase. Launching a world-ending war was as physically easy as pushing a button on a desk.
Fisher recognized that the punishment for nuclear war, the destruction of humanity, was too abstract and delayed to be an effective psychological deterrent in a moment of panic.
So he proposed a horrifying, brilliant commitment device. He suggested taking the nuclear launch codes, placing them inside a small capsule, and surgically implanting that capsule next to the heart of a volunteer who would carry a butcher knife and follow the president 24 hours a day.
The implication is brutal.
If the president decided he needed to launch nuclear weapons and wipe out millions of distant, faceless people, he couldn't just push a sterile button. He would have to look this innocent volunteer in the eye, take the butcher knife, personally murder him, and physically dig the codes out of his bleeding chest.
Fisher wanted to force the president to experience the immediate, visceral horror of murder before initiating a war. It takes a delayed, abstract cost and makes it violently, immediately punishing.
While obviously theoretical and never implemented, the psychology is flawless. The more immediate and certain the pain, the less likely the behavior.
You can apply this in your own life through habit contracts and accountability partners.
Yeah.
We care desperately about our social standing. If you promise yourself you will work out and you fail, the only cost is private disappointment.
But if you sign a literal contract with a friend, stating that if you miss a workout, you must immediately hand them $100 in cash, the calculus changes. The immediate financial and social pain of handing over the money makes the act of staying in bed intensely unsatisfying.
Okay, we have thoroughly mapped the 4 laws of the habit loop. But the book crosses into a fascinating, slightly controversial territory in its final chapters. It shifts from how to be good at your habits to how to be undeniably great.
And to do that, we have to talk about the uncomfortable reality of genetics and talent.
It is a topic that makes people uncomfortable because it feels deterministic, and we love the narrative that hard work conquers absolutely everything. But let's look at the biomechanics of 2 legendary athletes. Michael Phelps is the most decorated Olympic swimmer in human history. Hicham El Guerrouj is a Moroccan runner who holds multiple breathtaking world records in the mile.
At first glance, they are entirely different. Phelps is 6'4", a giant. El Guerrouj is 5'9", but their physical dimensions are wildly disproportionate.
Right.
Phelps has the legs of a man who is much shorter and a massive, elongated torso. El Guerrouj has the torso of a short man, but incredibly long, spindly legs.
In the swimming pool, Phelps' long torso acts like the hull of a canoe, riding high on the water, while his short legs reduce drag. On the track, El Guerrouj's incredibly long legs give him a massive stride length, while his light upper body requires very little oxygen to carry.
If you swap their sports, if you put Phelps on the track and El Guerrouj in the pool, they would both fail miserably. Their insane work ethics would not matter.
Genes do not determine your destiny, but they absolutely dictate your areas of opportunity. The secret to maximizing your habits is to play the game where the odds are fundamentally stacked in your favor.
If you have the genetic build of a gymnast, do not spend 10 years trying to become a professional basketball player. Work hard, yes, but direct that effort where your natural inclinations act as a multiplier, not a headwind.
And once you find that optimal game, you face a new enemy. Because eventually, even the habits perfectly suited to your genetics become routine. And when they become routine, they become boring.
Let's look at Steve Martin, arguably one of the most successful and innovative comedians of the 20th century. He famously described his career trajectory as 10 years spent learning, 4 years spent refining, and 4 years as a wild success.
10 years of performing magic tricks and playing banjo to empty rooms and hostile crowds? How did he not just give up?
The answer lies in the Goldilocks rule. Human beings experience peak motivation, that elusive state of flow, when they're working on tasks that are situated right on the razor's edge of their current abilities. Not too hard, which causes anxiety, and not too easy, which causes boredom.
Scientific literature suggests the sweet spot is roughly 4% beyond your current skill level. Steve Martin survived the decade of obscurity because he didn't do the exact same routine every night, but he also didn't throw out his entire act when he bombed.
He kept the core jokes that reliably got laughs, but he constantly added just a minute or two of brand new, highly risky material. He manufactured a state where he experienced just enough victory to feel satisfied, and just enough failure to keep him desperately engaged.
This reveals a harsh truth that shatters another cultural myth. We think the greatest threat to success is failure. But James Clear argues the greatest threat is actually boredom.
When a habit becomes automatic, we stop paying attention. We get bored. The only difference between a professional and an amateur is that the professional falls in love with the boredom.
They step up to the starting block or the blank page and put the reps in even when it is physically painful and completely devoid of excitement. Amateurs wait for inspiration, professionals rely on their schedule.
But there is a hidden, dangerous downside to habits. Automaticity is a double-edged sword. When a behavior becomes completely unconscious, you stop thinking about how to improve it.
You assume that because you are doing it every day, you are getting better. But in reality, your performance often plateaus or even slides backward due to mindless repetition. The formula for true mastery is habits plus deliberate practice.
You see this perfectly illustrated by the 1986 Los Angeles Lakers. They had a roster packed with Hall of Fame talent, but they suffered a humiliating defeat in the playoffs.
The following year, their coach, Pat Riley, instituted a system called CBE Career Best Effort. He didn't ask his players to make massive, heroic leaps. He asked them to improve their output by exactly 1% over their baseline performance from the previous year.
But the key was the tracking. Riley's system relentlessly tracked everything, not just points, but offensive rebounds, defensive rotations, diving for loose balls.
They rigorously reviewed their performance, holding a mirror up to what they were doing automatically, and intentionally looking for microscopic areas of friction to smooth out. It was a rigid system of conscious reflection injected into their automatic habits, and they went on to win back-to-back championships.
You have to build a system of reflection into your own life to prevent your identity from becoming rigid and fragile. An annual review, or what Clear calls an integrity report, where you step back from the daily grind and ask, am I still becoming the person I actually want to be?
Are these habits, which served me 5 years ago, still aligning with my core values today? If your identity is too rigidly tied to a specific outcome, like I am an athlete, what happens when you tear your ACL? Your entire self-worth collapses.
But if your identity is I am someone who overcomes adversity, you can transition those habits to a new pursuit.
Which brings us full circle, back to the underlying philosophy of the entire deep dive, perfectly summarized by an ancient Greek puzzle known as the Sorites paradox.
The paradox asks a simple question. Does one single coin make a person rich? The logical answer is no. If you give a poor person one coin, they're still poor. Does a second coin make them rich? No.
But the paradox dictates that if you continually add one coin at a time, eventually you cross a threshold where absolutely no one could deny that the person is wealthy.
So can one single tiny change one atomic habit transform your life? In isolation on a Tuesday morning? No. But through the relentless sheer weight of compounding, yes. It is an undeniable mathematical and biological inevitability.
The profound takeaway here is that there is no final destination. Success is not a mountain peak you finally summit and then sit down to rest. It is an endless, continuous process of refinement. If you are struggling right now, if you feel stuck, you must absolve yourself of the guilt that you are simply weak or lacking willpower.
The problem isn't you. The problem is your system. We spend so much of our finite lives obsessing over the exact moment the ice cube is going to melt. We stare at the calendar, waiting for the day we hit the target weight or the target income, and we completely miss the fact that the beauty and the meaning are found in the rising temperature.
Your habits are not just tedious chores to be checked off a list. They are the physical chisels you are using, strike by strike, day by day, to carve the ultimate masterpiece of your own life.
But this leaves us with a slightly terrifying, highly provocative final question to mull over. We've spent this entire time talking about how to engineer your environment so that your brain automatically executes behaviors without conscious thought.
We've talked about manipulating dopamine and hiding cues. But if you successfully hack your environment to guarantee your success, and your habits run entirely on autopilot, where does free will actually live?
If you are entirely the product of your engineered systems, are you genuinely making choices every day, or have you just become a highly effective, perfectly programmed machine? Something to think deeply about as you look around your room and decide what tiny vote you're going to cast the moment this audio ends.